I was 10 years old when the rules first appeared in our house. We lived in a cramped two-bedroom place in Lakewood, Colorado, the kind with wood paneling that made everything look darker than it was, and carpet that had seen better days before I was born. My room was barely big enough for a twin bed and a dresser, but Mom and Dad had painted the walls bright blue to make it feel bigger. Money was tight in the Mercer household. Dad worked as a maintenance supervisor at an apartment complex, and Mom took whatever part-time jobs fit around his schedule. They never said we were poor, but I knew which kids at school got new shoes whenever they wanted, and which ones, like me, wore them until our toes pressed against the front. What my parents lacked in cash, they made up for with imagination. Dad could transform our small backyard into pirate territory with nothing but some sticks and an old sheet. Mom could make power outages into adventures, gathering us in a blanket fort with flashlights while she told stories about magical worlds. "Danny, you want pancakes?" Mom called from the kitchen that Tuesday morning. The smell of butter melting on the griddle had already pulled me from bed. "Coming!" I slid into the kitchen in my socks, nearly colliding with Dad, who stood frozen in place, staring at something on the counter. "Eli? What's wrong?" Mom asked. Dad held up the cereal box he'd been about to pour. "Look at this." "What?" Mom peered at the box, then took it from him. "Where did this come from?" I squeezed between them to see. Written on the side of the Cheerios box in black marker was a simple message. "Today, everyone must walk backward through doorways." "Did you write this?" Mom asked Dad, her eyebrows raised. Dad shook his head. "I thought you did. Like a game for Danny." They both looked at me. I shrugged. "Wasn't me." A pause hung in the air before Dad's face broke into a smile. "Well, rules are rules," he said, then dramatically turned around and backed his way out of the kitchen doorway. Mom laughed. "Elliot Mercer, what are you doing?" "Following the instructions," Dad called from the hallway. "Come on, Viv, your turn." That was how our Tuesday began, with all three of us awkwardly backing through every doorway in the house. I banged my elbow on the bathroom door frame, and Dad nearly knocked over a lamp backing into the living room. By dinner time, we were experts at feeling behind us with our hands before stepping backward. "This is silly," I said, even as I carefully backed my way to the dinner table. "Sometimes silly is exactly what people need," Dad replied, winking at me. The next morning, the marker message on the cereal box was gone. I remember feeling disappointed, thinking our game was over. But then Mom found a note stuck to the bathroom mirror. "Speak in rhymes until noon." "Where did that come from?" I asked. Mom tried to look innocent. "I don't know. It's quite the surprise. Perhaps we should follow what it advises." I groaned at her forced rhyme, but joined in anyway. Dad was terrible at it. He kept starting sentences normally, then stopping midway with a panicked look before adding awkward rhyming words at the end. "Time to go to school, tool? No, wait. Pool, cool, drool. Just say my jewel," Mom suggested, trying not to laugh. "Right. Time to go to school, my jewel." Dad ruffled my hair. "That doesn't even make sense." 2 days later, I found a folded paper in my math book. Everyone must wear socks on their hands during dinner. "These rules keep showing up," I said that evening, struggling to hold my fork with sock-covered fingers. "How are you doing this?" "Us?" Mom said innocently. "We're just following the rules, same as you." Dad nodded, equally unconvincing. "They just appear." I didn't believe them, but I didn't care. The rules made regular days special. Some were simple. Eat dinner with serving spoons only, or all shirts must be worn backward today. Others required more effort, like build a fort in the living room and sleep there tonight, or no one speaks between 4 and 5 on p.m. The challenges appeared randomly, sometimes 3 in 1 week, then nothing for days. They showed up everywhere, inside cabinet doors, taped under my dinner plate, folded into clean laundry. "I found another one," Mom announced one Saturday morning, holding up a slip of paper she'd discovered in the coffee can. Everyone must hop on one foot when crossing the kitchen today. You two are ridiculous, I said, but I was already tucking my left foot behind me to hop across to the refrigerator. Dad grabbed the paper from Mom and studied it with exaggerated seriousness. The rules have spoken, Danny boy. Where do they come from? I asked, genuinely curious. My parents exchanged a quick look before Dad shrugged. It's a mystery. The important thing is that we follow them. What happens if we don't? Nothing bad, Mom said quickly. It's just a game. But games are more fun when you play by the rules, Dad added. I never questioned which of them was creating the challenges. It didn't matter. What mattered was how we transformed ordinary moments into shared adventures. While my classmates talked about their new video games or trips to water parks, I had stories about my family hopping through the kitchen or eating spaghetti with measuring cups instead of forks. Later that summer, I caught Dad writing something on a slip of paper at his desk. When he saw me in the doorway, he quickly covered it with his hand. Is that a new rule? I asked. Maybe, he said with a mischievous smile. You'll have to wait and see where it turns up. I pretended not to notice when he slipped into my room while I was watching TV. Sure enough, at bedtime, I found a note inside my pillowcase. Tell 10 jokes at breakfast tomorrow. I spent half the night rehearsing jokes from a book I'd checked out from the school library. Why don't scientists trust atoms? I asked over breakfast the next morning. Because they make up everything. Mom gave an exaggerated groan while Dad chuckled. 9 jokes later, we were all laughing so hard that milk nearly came out my nose. These rules are the best, I declared, wiping my mouth. Dad reached across the table and squeezed my hand. They make life interesting, don't they? I nodded eagerly. At 10 years old, I couldn't have known how those simple notes would shape our family for decades to come. I couldn't have imagined that one day we'd question their origin, or that they might be something more than a game. Back then, they were just pieces of paper with silly instructions, magical little disruptions to ordinary life in our small house in Lakewood. Just another way my parents turned having little into having enough. Jake's house always smelled like laundry detergent and pizza. His mom kept a bowl of candy on the coffee table that anyone could take from whenever they wanted. No rules about it, no special instructions. Just normal. You want another slice? Jake asked, already reaching for the box on the counter. Yeah, thanks. I watched him grab 2 more pieces without washing his hands first or counting to 7 or any of the other random things my family might have been required to do on a Thursday evening. I was 14 now, and this was my 3rd sleepover at Jake's house in Edgewater. Each visit made our own house in Lakewood seem stranger by comparison. No notes appeared on his bathroom mirror. No one had to hop on one leg through doorways or speak in whispers between 4 and 5 o'clock. My dad's taking us fishing tomorrow if you want, Jake said, his mouth full of pepperoni. There's this spot by the lake where he caught a huge bass last time. That sounds awesome, but I need to be home by noon. I took a bite of my pizza. We can't use the front door right now, so my mom needs me to help move some stuff through the back. Jake stopped chewing and looked at me. What do you mean you can't use the front door? I realized my mistake immediately. It's kind of broken. The lie felt clumsy. You just said you couldn't use it, not that it was broken. Jake's eyebrows pushed together. What's wrong with your door? Nothing's wrong with it. I hesitated, wondering how to explain. We just can't use it right now. It's forbidden. Forbidden? By who? It's just this thing we do. I shrugged, trying to make it sound normal, like a family game. Jake stared at me like I'd sprouted a second head. Your family has a game where you can't use the front door? Put that way, it did sound completely insane. I'd never really thought about how our rules would sound to someone else. They were just part of life, like brushing teeth or doing homework. It's not a big deal, I mumbled. Every family has weird stuff they do. Yeah, but my family's weird stuff is like, My dad singing in the shower, not treating doors like they're haunted or something. I laughed it off, but Jake's reaction stuck with me. On the walk home the next day, I thought about all the rules we'd followed over the years. Stand in each corner of your bedroom for exactly 40 seconds. Wear mismatched socks on Tuesdays. Place a spoon under your pillow and sleep with your head at the foot of the bed. When had I stopped questioning where these instructions came from? Mom was in the kitchen when I got home, cutting vegetables for soup. I dropped my backpack by the table. "Did you have fun at Jake's?" she asked, without looking up. "Yeah." I watched her for a moment. "Mom, why do we do the rules thing?" Her knife paused mid-slice. "What do you mean?" "I mean, where do they come from? Who makes them up?" She resumed cutting, a little faster now. "They just appear. You know that." "But they don't just appear," I pressed. "Either you or Dad writes them. I've known that since I was like 10. Mom put down her knife and turned to face me. "Does it matter who writes them? The important thing is that we follow them." "But why?" I told Jake about the front door thing, and he looked at me like I was crazy. She made a face. "Every family has traditions, Danny. This is ours. Normal traditions are like having pancakes on Sundays or watching certain movies on Christmas, not forbidden doors and midnight walks around the block." Mom wiped her hands on a dish towel. "Your father and I started this when you were little because it made ordinary days special. You loved it." "I'm not little anymore." "No, you're not," she sighed. "But the rules are important to this family. They matter." I wanted to ask why they mattered so much, but something in her expression stopped me. Instead, I nodded and took my backpack upstairs. That evening, Dad found me doing homework at my desk. "Your mother mentioned you had some questions about our family tradition," he said, leaning against my door frame. I shrugged. "Just seems weird that we're still doing it. I'm 14 now." Dad came in and sat on the edge of my bed. "The rules connect us, Danny. There's something special we share. But where do they come from? Just tell me that." He rubbed his chin before speaking. "Some things don't need explanations, they just work." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." He reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "Trust me on this, okay?" I didn't push further. Despite my questions, there was still something comforting about our strange rituals. They were annoying sometimes, even embarrassing now that I was older, but they were ours. The rules grew more complicated that year. Where they had once been simple, eat with your non-dominant hand or count to 20 between sentences, they now required more effort and planning. One morning in October, I found a note tucked into my shoe. "Walk around the block at midnight tonight. Record what you see." "Seriously?" I muttered. It was a school night, and temperatures had dropped below freezing. At 11:55 that night, Mom knocked softly on my door. "Time for your walk," she whispered, handing me a small notebook. "This is dumb," I said, but I pulled on my winter coat anyway. The neighborhood looked different at midnight, quieter, the houses dark except for scattered porch lights. I wrote down everything as instructed: a cat crossing the street, a porch swing moving in the wind, a newspaper forgotten in a driveway. When I got home, Dad was waiting by the back door. "Anything interesting?" he asked, taking the notebook. "Not really." I stamped snow from my boots. "Can I go to bed now?" He nodded, but there was something in his expression, a kind of relief, that struck me as odd. It was the same look I'd seen when I completed other rules, like he'd been worried about what would happen if I didn't. In early November, another note appeared inside the box of cereal. "Place cups of water in these exact locations." The backside of the paper contained a crude map of our house with X marks in various spots. "This is getting ridiculous," I complained as I filled the 6th cup. "Be precise," Dad reminded me, watching from the hallway. "Make sure they're exactly where marked." I placed cups on windowsills, under chairs, beside doors. 12 in total, positioned according to the map. For 3 days, we carefully moved around them, refilling any that evaporated. On the 4th day, a new note instructed us to empty them in a specific order. "Does this feel like more than a game to you?" I asked Mom after we'd poured the last cup down the drain. "What do you mean?" "You and Dad. You act like something bad will happen if we don't follow the rules exactly." Mom busied herself wiping the counter. "We're just committed to the tradition." 2 weeks later, Dad died. The rule had appeared on a Thursday. Purchase model airplane, Dark J470, from Hobbytown in Denver. Must be acquired today. Dad had called from work. "I'll stop on my way home," he told Mom. A semi-truck jackknifed on I-70. 5 cars were involved in the pileup. Dad's Toyota was crushed between the truck and the concrete divider. I remember fragments of that day. The police at our door. Mom collapsing in the hallway. The cups of water neighbors brought that no one drank. I remember staring at the half-finished model airplane I'd been working on, thinking Dad would never help me complete it now. At the funeral in Crown Hill Cemetery, I stood beside Mom as people I barely knew told me how sorry they were. Snow dusted the tops of gravestones and my dress shoes sank into the wet grass. I kept waiting for Dad to pull me aside and explain this was just another elaborate rule. Stand solemnly beside a casket for 2 hours, pretend to be sad, then everything would go back to normal. But it wasn't a game. He was gone. After everyone left, Mom and I remained by the fresh mound of dirt. She took my hand, her fingers ice cold. "We'll continue," she whispered. "The rules. Your father would want that." Part of me wanted to scream. Dad had died following one of our stupid rules. If that note hadn't appeared, he would have driven straight home on the interstate instead of detouring to Denver. He would still be alive. But what came out of my mouth was, "Okay." Because despite everything, despite the questions and doubts, the rules were our last connection to him. They were the game he had created, the tradition he had maintained, the strange glue that had held our family together for years. As we walked back to the car, I wondered why Dad had been so committed to following an instruction about a model airplane, why any of our rules had mattered so much to him. But all those questions got buried under how sad I felt. It was just too much to think about right now. I helped Mom into the passenger seat and closed her door carefully. The keys felt wrong in my hand. Too adult, too permanent. Before starting the car, I checked the glove compartment, the sun visors, under the seats. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe a note, a new rule, some message from beyond. But there was nothing, just us now, left to follow whatever instructions might appear next. The August heat pressed against my back as I lugged the last of my cardboard boxes up 3 flights of stairs to room 317. The residence hall smelled like fresh paint and carpet cleaner, with undertones of whatever microwaved meals the early arrivals had already prepared. Mom trailed behind me, clutching a set of new towels she'd splurged on as a going-away present. "This is nice," she said, looking around the cramped dormitory room with its twin beds and particle board desks. "Cozy." I set the box down next to the others and stretched my arms. That's one word for it. My new roommate wouldn't arrive until tomorrow, so I had the room to myself for the night. Mom helped me unpack, hanging clothes in the narrow closet and arranging books on the shelf above my desk. We worked mostly in silence. I knew she was thinking about Dad. He should have been here for this milestone, making jokes about college food and pretending not to get emotional. "You'll call me, right?" Mom asked as she smoothed my comforter for the 3rd time. "Not every day, but I'll call," I promised, "and I'll be home for fall break." We both knew what she was really asking. With me gone, who would follow the rules with her? Who would stand in each corner of the house for exactly 2 minutes when the note demanded it, or eat dinner with spoons instead of forks, because an instruction said so? In the 3 years since Dad's death, the rules had continued to appear. They were less frequent, maybe 1 or 2 a month instead of several each week, but they remained part of our routine. Mom clung to them like a lifeline to Dad, and I never had the heart to refuse. "I left some containers of food in your mini fridge," she said, checking her watch. "I should go before traffic gets bad." At the door, she hugged me tight, her small frame somehow managing to engulf mine. "Remember who you are," she whispered. I wasn't entirely sure what she meant, a general motherly sentiment or a specific reminder about our family tradition, but I nodded anyway. After she left, I sat on my new bed, surrounded by the remnants of home I'd brought with me, photos, a few books, my laptop. For the first time in my life, I was completely free from the strange ritual that had defined our household. No notes would appear under my pillow. No one would insist I walk backward through doorways or avoid using certain words on Tuesdays. I could just be normal. My roommate, Trevor, arrived the next morning with a carload of electronics and sports equipment. He was from Connecticut, played lacrosse, and laughed easily. We spent orientation week navigating campus together, figuring out the best shortcuts between buildings and which dining hall had the least terrible food. The first month passed in a blur of new routines. I joined the campus newspaper, struggled through calculus, and stayed up too late arguing about movies with the guys down the hall. Sometimes I caught myself about to perform one of the old rules, standing in corners for prescribed amounts of time or avoiding cracks in the sidewalk on specific days. Each time I'd stop myself, glancing around to see if anyone had noticed. No one had, because no one was watching for the strange behaviors that had become second nature to me. By Halloween, most of those habits had faded. I still hesitated before using a red pen on Thursdays, but I made myself do it anyway. Nothing bad happened. No accidents. No sudden phone calls with terrible news. No inexplicable misfortunes. Just ordinary college life, with its own natural highs and lows. "You want to come home this weekend?" Mom asked during our weekly Sunday call. "I found your winter coat in the back of the closet. I've got 2 papers due Monday," I said. "Maybe next time." I made excuses through most of freshman year, visiting only for Christmas and spring break. Each time I went home, Mom would have a rule waiting. Sleep with your head at the foot of the bed or place shoes in a circle in the backyard, and I'd comply to make her happy. But returning to campus felt like stepping back into reality, leaving behind the strange fictions of childhood. Sophomore year, I moved into an apartment with Trevor and 2 other guys. Junior year, I declared a journalism major and spent most of my time at the student newspaper. Life settled into patterns entirely of my own making. Then came Thanksgiving break of my senior year. "Danny," Mom called from the porch as I pulled into the driveway. Her hair had more gray than I remembered from my brief visit over the summer, but her smile was the same, warm and a little anxious around the edges. I hugged her, noticing how much smaller she seemed now. "The house looks good," I said, though nothing had changed since my childhood. Same faded siding, same concrete steps with the chip on the corner, same yard that never quite thrived, no matter how much attention it received. Come in," she urged, taking my duffel bag. "I made your favorite casserole." Inside, I smelled home right away. Laundry detergent, the faint mustiness of old carpet, cinnamon from whatever Mom had baked that morning. I followed her to the kitchen, where she'd set the table with the good plates, the ones we only used for holidays. "Oh, before I forget," she said, her voice trying too hard to sound casual. She gestured toward the refrigerator. There, held by a magnet shaped like Colorado, was a note written in black marker on lined paper. "The eldest must count backward from 100 before eating tonight." I stopped, staring at it. The handwriting wasn't Mom's or mine. It was the same anonymous script that had appeared on all our rules over the years, slightly blocky capital letters, evenly spaced. "Where did this come from?" I asked. Mom busied herself stirring something on the stove. "You know how it works, Danny. They just appear." A rush of childhood memories flooded back. Dad ruffling my hair as we backed through doorways together, Mom pretending to find notes in the cereal box. Both of them insisting with twinkling eyes that they had no idea where the instructions came from. But Dad was gone now, and Mom was looking at me with such hope, such expectation. "Right," I said, forcing a smile. "The rules appear, just like always." After putting my things in my old bedroom, which Mom had kept exactly as I'd left it 4 years ago, I joined her for dinner. True to the rule, I counted backward from 100 before taking my first bite. Mom watched me with visible relief when I reached 1 and picked up my fork. "So, how are your classes this semester?" she asked. The conversation drifted through safe topics. My upcoming graduation, her book club, news about neighbors I barely remembered. We avoided mentioning Dad or the note on the refrigerator. The next morning I found another rule tucked inside my shoe. Stand in the rain for 10 minutes today. Must be completed before noon. I checked the weather app on my phone. Clear skies, no chance of precipitation. Part of me wanted to point this out to Mom, to break through the pretense that these instructions magically appeared rather than being carefully planted by her. Instead, I went to the backyard and turned on the sprinkler, standing under its weak spray for exactly 10 minutes while Mom watched from the kitchen window. On Saturday, a note appeared under my coffee mug. "Arrange all canned goods in rainbow order." I spent an hour reorganizing Mom's pantry, sorting beans and vegetables and soups by the colors on their labels. Sunday's rule was slipped between the pages of the newspaper. Call 303-555-7832 and ask for yesterday's weather. Say nothing else. I dialed the unfamiliar number, half expecting it to be disconnected. Instead, an elderly woman answered. "Hello? I'm calling for yesterday's weather," I said, feeling ridiculous. A pause. "Partly cloudy, high of 51, she replied, then hung up. I stared at my phone. Who was that woman? How had she known what to say? The interaction freaked me out in a way none of the other rules had. Later that day, while Mom napped, I searched the house for clues. I checked her desk drawers, looked through her planner, even examined the notepads by the phone for indentations of past notes. Nothing explained who might be creating these rules or how they appeared so mysteriously. On Monday, before heading back to campus, I found Mom in the kitchen preparing a sandwich for my drive. "This was nice," she said. "Having you home, following the rules together again." I nodded, choosing my words carefully. "Mom, the rules. They've been happening the whole time I've been gone?" "Of course." She wrapped the sandwich in wax paper, not meeting my eyes. "They never stopped. And you've been following them? Alone?" She looked up then, a flash of something, defiance maybe, crossing her face. "They're important, Danny. Your father believed that. But why? Dad never explained why they mattered so much." My father's exact words, repeated years later. I took the sandwich, knowing I wouldn't get a more satisfying answer. "I'll be back for Christmas," I promised. The drive to Boulder gave me time to think. 4 days at home had pulled me back into my family's weird traditions. All those rules felt strange, but also kind of normal again. I knew what to do, even if I didn't totally fit in anymore. Back at my apartment, Trevor was playing video games with our other roommates. "Hey, how was the visit with your mom?" he called without looking away from the screen. "Fine," I said. "Normal." But that night, as I unpacked my duffel bag, I found myself checking under my pillow, inside my shoes, between the pages of my textbooks, looking for notes that wouldn't be there. The rules had once again become part of who I was, this weird second nature I carried back to my regular life. Not exactly bad, not exactly good, just somewhere in the middle. Like some family inside joke that nobody else would understand. I sat on the edge of my bed thinking about the strange phone call I'd made and the woman who had answered. It left me with questions I couldn't really put into words. What were these rules anyway? Who came up with them? And what bothered me most? Why did breaking them still feel so dangerous, even now? Sarah's apartment smelled like coffee and new textbooks. Light filtered through half-drawn blinds as I watched her pack for our weekend trip to my mother's house. After 6 months together, it felt like the right time to introduce them properly. "You sure your mom won't mind me staying in your old room?" Sarah folded a sweater with precise movements, tucking it into her overnight bag. "Trust me, she's thrilled I'm bringing someone home." I zipped my duffel bag closed. "She's wanted to meet you since our second date." "Exaggerating much?" Sarah smiled, tapping my arm with her knuckles. "Maybe a little." The drive to Lakewood took longer than usual with Friday afternoon traffic clogging I-25. Sarah pointed out the mountains that stood tall in the distance, their peaks still capped with spring snow. "Your mom's kept the same house all these years?" she asked as we exited the highway. "Yeah, too many memories to leave, I guess." I navigated the familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood. Plus, she owns it outright now. Mom was waiting at the door when we pulled into the driveway. She'd trimmed her hair since Christmas, the silver strands now barely reaching her shoulders. "You must be Sarah." Mom embraced her before Sarah could even set down her bag. "I've heard so much about you." "All good, I hope." Sarah returned the hug with genuine warmth. Nothing but glowing reviews. Mom winked at me over Sarah's shoulder. We carried our bags inside. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the walls a bit more faded but essentially unchanged from my childhood. Family photos lined the hallway, me at various ages, often flanked by both parents until the pictures showed just Mom and me after Dad died. "I made up your old room," Mom said, leading us down the hall. "I know you're adults, so I didn't bother with any separate sleeping arrangements." "Thanks, Mom." I squeezed her shoulder as we passed. My childhood bedroom had been partially converted to a sewing room, but my twin bed remained against one wall, now made up with fresh sheets. A small air mattress had been positioned beside it to expand the sleeping space. "It's not the Ritz," Mom apologized. "It's perfect," Sarah assured her. "Thank you for having me." We unpacked our toiletries in the bathroom, the surroundings reminding me of my teenage years. Later, Mom served lasagna and asked Sarah about her research while I watched them interact, relieved at how easily they connected. "Danny tells me you're almost finished with your degree," Mom said as she cleared our plates. "Just defending my thesis next month." Sarah helped gather the empty glasses. "Then hopefully joining a research team at the university." "She's being modest," I added. Her professor already promised her a position. After dinner, we played cards at the kitchen table, Mom telling Sarah embarrassing stories about my childhood while I pretended to be mortified. By the time we all headed to bed, the atmosphere felt comfortable, almost normal, something I hadn't expected. "Your mom is wonderful," Sarah whispered as we settled into the expanded bed arrangement in my old room. She leaned over to kiss me before retrieving her phone from her bag. "I'm going to set an alarm for tomorrow." When she pulled back the pillow to place her phone underneath, her hand froze. She lifted a folded piece of paper that had been hidden there. "What's this?" she asked, unfolding it. I knew immediately what it was, but hoped somehow I was wrong. I felt completely embarrassed as Sarah read the note aloud. "Sleep with shoes on tonight." She looked at me, eyebrows raised, a bemused smile on her face. "Is this some kind of joke?" I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how bizarre our family tradition would sound to an outsider. "It's complicated. You want me to wear shoes to bed?" She laughed softly. "Why would I do that?" "It's this thing we do." I sat up straighter, trying to find the right words. "My family, I mean. We call them the rules." Sarah's smile dropped when she realized I wasn't laughing with her. "Rules?" Since I was a kid, these notes would appear around the house with instructions. We'd follow them. It was like a game. The explanation sounded childish even to my own ears. "You're serious?" She examined the paper more closely. "Who wrote this?" "That's part of it. We don't know." I took the note from her, recognizing the familiar block handwriting that had accompanied my entire childhood. They just appear. Sarah's expression changed from confusion to skepticism. Your mom is pranking us, right? It's not a prank. I retrieved my sneakers from beside the door and placed them next to the bed. We really do this. Danny, that's... She trailed off, watching as I unlaced my shoes in preparation for wearing them to bed. Weird? Yeah, I know. I sighed. But it's important to my mom. And it was important to my dad. Sarah studied my face for a moment, then slowly reached for her flats. You really expect me to sleep in shoes? Just for tonight. I offered a weak smile. Consider it a strange family tradition. Most families have holiday recipes or yearly trips to the lake, she muttered, but slipped her feet into her shoes nonetheless. Not wearing footwear to bed. We lay back awkwardly, the shoes making it difficult to get comfortable. Sarah turned to face me in the dim light. Is there something you're not telling me about this? She asked quietly. No, it's just what we do. It's been this way since I was 10. But why? I had no good answer. It just is. Sarah fell asleep eventually, but I lay awake much longer, acutely aware of how strange our tradition must seem to her. I'd never had to explain the rules to anyone before, and hearing myself try to rationalize them made me realize how little sense they actually made. The next morning, Sarah kicked off her shoes with visible relief. That was the worst night's sleep I've had in years, she grumbled, though her tone remained good-natured. Mom had already prepared breakfast when we entered the kitchen. She glanced at our feet, nodding slightly when she saw we weren't wearing shoes. Sleep well? She asked innocently. Like a rock, I lied. Sarah hummed noncommittally, accepting a cup of coffee from my mother. I noticed a new note taped to the refrigerator. Eat breakfast standing up today. Without comment, Mom began serving pancakes onto plates placed on the counter rather than the table. I automatically took my position standing beside one of the plates. Sarah remained seated at the table, looking between us in confusion. Aren't we eating at the table? She asked. Mom pointed to the note. Standing breakfast today. Sarah laughed nervously. You're actually doing this. It's easier than fighting it, I said, cutting into my pancakes while balancing my plate in one hand. Sarah paused for a second, then joined us at the counter. She looked both amused and worried. This is seriously a thing your family does? Follow random notes like they're commands? They're not commands, Mom corrected gently. They're more like suggestions with consequences. Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Consequences? I shot Mom a warning look. She means it's more fun when everyone participates. Right, Mom agreed quickly. It's a family thing. Sarah finished her breakfast in contemplative silence. Later, as we helped clean the kitchen, she pulled me aside. Your mom seems really committed to this game, she whispered. We both are. I stacked the clean plates in the cupboard. It's been part of our lives for a long time. But who writes the notes? Is it your mom? No one writes them. They just appear. Things don't just appear, Danny. Her voice took on the patient tone she used when explaining scientific concepts. Someone has to be creating these notes. Before I could respond, Mom called from the living room that she'd found another note inside a book she was reading. Everyone must wear clothes inside out until dinner. Sarah's expression was priceless as she watched Mom and me retreat to our rooms to reverse our clothing. When we returned, my t-shirt seams now visible on the outside, and Mom's blouse clearly inside out, Sarah hadn't moved. You're kidding me, she said. Your turn, Mom replied cheerfully. I'm not turning my clothes inside out. An uncomfortable silence fell between us. Mom's smile tightened slightly. It's just for a few hours, I encouraged. It's ridiculous is what it is. Sarah crossed her arms. I'm sorry, but I don't understand why you're both acting like these random notes are some kind of law." Mom's face fell. "It's not about understanding, it's about participation." "Please," I added. "For me?" Sarah stared at me for a while, then sighed dramatically. "The things I do for you, Mercer." She disappeared into my bedroom, returning minutes later with her sweater and jeans reversed, looking thoroughly disgruntled. The day continued with more rules appearing, avoiding the use of words containing the letter P for 2 hours, nearly impossible, as Sarah repeatedly pointed out, arranging all shoes in the house in a specific pattern in the hallway, and standing in each corner of the living room for 20 seconds before entering any other room. By evening, Sarah's amusement was completely gone, replaced with annoyance. As we prepared for bed, no new note having appeared, she finally broke. "What is the actual point of all this?" she demanded, sitting cross-legged on our makeshift bed. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you and your mom are following arbitrary instructions for absolutely no reason." "It's complicated," I repeated lamely. "That's not an answer, Danny." I ran a hand through my hair, trying to articulate something I'd never had to explain before. "It's just something we've always done. My dad started it when I was little. After he died, Mom and I kept it going." Sarah's expression softened at the mention of my father. "So it's a way of remembering him?" "Partly, I guess." The explanation felt incomplete, but it was the most logical one I could offer. It became part of who we are as a family. She nodded slowly. "I can understand traditions that help you feel connected to someone you've lost, but these seem so random." "That's kind of the point," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what the point actually was. By Sunday morning, something had changed, when a note appeared instructing everyone to count backward from 50 before speaking after 10 a.m. Sarah just went along with it without arguing. She stood next to us in the kitchen, quietly counting under her breath before asking if anyone wanted more coffee. Mom beamed at her. "You're getting the hang of it." "When in Rome," Sarah shrugged, but I caught the small smile she tried to hide. As we packed our bags to leave, Sarah disappeared into the bathroom. Mom took the opportunity to pull me aside. "I like her," she whispered. "She adapts." "She thinks we're both crazy," I replied. "Maybe a little." Mom patted my cheek. "But she's willing to be crazy with you. That's rare." The drive back to Denver was quiet at first. Sarah watched the landscape roll by, seemingly lost in thought. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "Can I ask you something about the rules?" I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "Sure." "Do you actually believe they just appear, with no one writing them?" I know how it sounds. That's not what I asked. I considered the question honestly. When I was a kid, I thought it was magic. Then I figured Mom and Dad were behind it. Now, I don't know. "Your mom seems genuinely surprised when they appear." "She does, doesn't she?" I pondered this. "Dad always acted the same way. But you don't think some external force is really planting instruction notes around your mother's house, right?" Sarah turned to face me more directly. "Because that would be irrational," I supplied. I was going to say concerning. We drove in silence for another mile before she continued. "The thing is, Danny, you and your mom take these rules so seriously. It's not just playing along. There's almost a fear there, like something bad will happen if you don't follow them." Her observation hit uncomfortably close to home. "It's not fear exactly." "Then what is it?" I struggled to find the right words. "It's more like respect for the tradition." Respect doesn't make someone anxious when rules aren't followed properly. She touched my arm gently. "I saw your mom's face when I initially refused to turn my clothes inside out. She was genuinely worried." The memory of Mom insisting we continue the rules after Dad's funeral surfaced in my mind. The desperation in her voice when she'd said, "We'll continue. The rules. Your father would want that." I've never really questioned it, I admitted. It was just part of our lives. Don't you think you should? Sarah's voice remained gentle, non-judgmental. I mean, I get family traditions, but this seems different. It's almost like... Like what? Like a compulsion or a superstition taken to an extreme. I wanted to defend our tradition, to explain that it was harmless, just a quirky family game. But Sarah's words had unlocked something, questions I'd buried since childhood. Why did Mom get anxious when rules weren't followed precisely? Why had Dad always checked so carefully that each instruction was completed? Why did we never talk about what would happen if we simply stopped? I don't know why it matters so much, I finally said, but it always has. You never wondered why your parents started this in the first place? Dad always said some things don't need explanations. I signaled for our exit off the highway. They just work. Sarah was quiet for a moment. That's not very satisfying. No, I agreed. It's not. As we approached her apartment building, the questions continued to tumble through my mind. Our family tradition suddenly seemed strange in a way it never had before. Not just eccentric, but inexplicable. Potentially unhealthy. I'm sorry if this weekend was weird for you, I said as I parked in front of her building. It was definitely unusual. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt but made no move to get out. But I'm glad I got to see this side of you. It helps me understand you better. And your verdict? She smiled, leaning over to kiss me softly. That I like you, weird family traditions and all. But I also think it might be good for you to examine why these rules feel so important. I nodded, knowing she was right. I'll think about it. Good. She gathered her bag. Because the scientist in me can't help but wonder, what would actually happen if you just didn't follow a rule? The question sent an unexpected chill through me, even considering it felt dangerous somehow. I don't know, I said honestly. I've never tried. Her expression turned curious. Never? Not even as a rebellious teenager? I guess I wasn't that rebellious. I watched her walk to her building, her suggestion playing on repeat in my mind. What would happen if I deliberately ignored a rule? The thought both terrified and intrigued me. As I drove to my own apartment, I realized how deeply ingrained our family tradition had become. Not just a quirky habit, but almost a belief system. One I'd never questioned until now. Sarah's practical perspective had awakened doubts I'd suppressed for years. Why had my family devoted so much energy to these arbitrary commands? More importantly, why did ignoring them feel so dangerous? I didn't have answers, but for the first time, I wanted to find them. The January chill seeped through the apartment walls even though the building's old heating system was working overtime. Sarah and I stood side by side in our kitchen, staring at the expanding pool of water on our linoleum floor. The pipe beneath our sink had burst during the night, a victim of the record-breaking cold snap that had hit Colorado since New Year's. That's not good, Sarah said, stating the obvious as she tightened the belt of her robe. I crouched down, opening the cabinet to inspect the damage. Water dripped steadily from a crack in the copper pipe. Definitely not. Our property manager arrived an hour later with bad news. The whole building's plumbing system is compromised, he explained, looking genuinely apologetic. We're shutting off the water to prevent further damage. Repairs will take at least a week, possibly 2. A week? Sarah and I exchanged worried glances. Sorry, folks. He handed me a list of nearby hotels offering discounted rates for displaced tenants. After he left, Sarah and I weighed our options, both of us silently calculating the cost of a week in even the cheapest hotel. We could stay with my mom, I finally suggested. She's got the space. Sarah nodded, relief evident on her face. Let's call her. Mom welcomed us with the enthusiasm she typically reserved for holiday visits. By that evening, we were settled into my old bedroom. now a strange hybrid of my teenage space and Mom's overflow storage. The twin bed remained against one wall, supplemented by an air mattress that didn't quite fit in the remaining floor space. "It's cozy," Mom said apologetically, fluffing a pillow on the air mattress. "It's perfect," Sarah assured her. "Thanks for taking us in." For 3 days, we fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Mom left for her library job each morning while Sarah and I set up makeshift workspaces at the dining table. In the evenings, we cooked together and played board games from the hall closet, stuff I hadn't seen since I was a kid that made me feel weirdly nostalgic. On the third night, I decided to organize our hastily packed clothes, which remained half unpacked in duffel bags. I reached for my winter gloves, intending to place them by the front door for morning, when something fell out of the right one. A folded piece of paper landed on the carpet. My stomach contracted with sudden apprehension. I knew what it was before I even picked it up. The distinctive crease of the paper, the way it had been tucked deep into the glove's finger. Another rule. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting I now recognized read, "Dig a hole 6 feet deep in the northwest corner of the backyard." Sarah walked in as I stared at the note. "What's that?" I handed it to her without speaking. She read it quickly, her eyes widening. 6 feet deep in winter? She moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. Outside, 2 feet of snow blanketed the yard, gleaming under the streetlight. The ground is completely frozen. I know. This is different from the other rules. She turned back to me, still holding the paper. The wearing shoes to bed thing was weird, but this is asking you to dig a grave-sized hole in frozen ground. "It's just the northwest corner," I said, though I didn't disagree with her assessment. "Not specified as grave-sized. 6 feet is literally how deep they bury coffins, Danny." I took the note back, reading it again, as if the words might somehow change. "Maybe it doesn't need to be done right away. Are you going to tell your mom?" I thought about it. Since Sarah had met my mother and witnessed our rule following firsthand, I'd been more willing to discuss the tradition openly. But something about this particular instruction made me hesitate. "Not yet," I decided. "Let's see if it even comes up." The next day passed without incident. I kept expecting Mom to mention the rule or ask if I'd found any new instructions, but she remained focused on helping Sarah organize digital photos for her research presentation. I spent the afternoon pretending to work while actually researching whether ground could be thawed enough to dig in winter conditions. The answer wasn't encouraging. Without industrial equipment, breaking through frost-hardened soil would be nearly impossible. By evening, a nagging sense of anxiety had taken root in my chest. I found myself glancing at the backyard through the kitchen window, imagining the northwest corner under its blanket of snow. "Everything okay?" Mom asked, catching me staring outside instead of helping with dinner preparations. "Yeah, just thinking about when we might be able to go back to our apartment." She nodded, but I could tell she didn't quite believe me. That night, I dreamed of digging, endless, exhausting digging through earth that never seemed to yield. I woke up with my arms aching as if I had actually been working through the night. The second day after finding the note, Mom cornered me in the hallway outside the bathroom. Her voice was low, urgent. "There's a rule, isn't there? Something you're supposed to do." I tried to look surprised. "What makes you say that?" "I know the signs, Danny. You've been distracted, looking out windows, checking the yard." I pulled the note from my pocket and showed it to her. As she read it, her expression tightened. "The northwest corner," she muttered. "It's ridiculous, Mom. The ground is frozen solid." She handed the note back, her fingers visibly unsteady. "You need to do it." "Why? What happens if I don't dig a random hole in the yard in the middle of winter?" "I don't know," she admitted, looking away. "But your father always said..." "Some things don't need explanations," I recited. "I know. But this isn't like wearing mismatched socks or avoiding certain words. This is physically impossible without a jackhammer. Nothing in the rules has ever been impossible, she insisted, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself. Difficult, yes. Strange, absolutely. But never impossible. The tension in her voice surprised me. In all our years of following rules, I'd rarely seen her this anxious about completing one. Fine, I said, more to calm her than anything else. I'll figure something out. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. That afternoon, I hiked through the snow to our neighbor Mr. Peterson's house. He'd lived next door for as long as I could remember, his garage a treasure trove of tools for every imaginable purpose. Need to dig a hole, I explained when he answered. Water drainage issue. He raised an eyebrow but asked no questions as he led me to his garage. Ground's hard as concrete right now. You'll need more than a regular shovel. He lent me a pickaxe, a steel digging bar, and a heavy-duty shovel. Good luck, he said. You're going to need it. Back at the house, Sarah was waiting in the kitchen, already dressed in her winter coat and boots. I'm helping, she announced before I could speak. You don't have to. I want to. She adjusted her hat, tucking stray strands of hair underneath. Besides, it'll go faster with both of us. We trudged through the snow to the northwest corner of the yard, using a garden stake from the shed to mark the spot. The snow was nearly 2 feet deep, but removing it was the easy part. When we hit the ground beneath, the earth was rock solid. I started with the digging bar, using it to break the frost layer. The metal tool clanged against the frozen soil, sending painful vibrations up my arms with each strike. Sarah and I took turns, our breath creating clouds in the cold air. After an hour of chipping away, we'd created only a shallow depression about 8 inches deep. Mom brought us hot coffee, hovering on the back porch with a worried expression. We'll never get to 6 feet at this rate, Sarah said, leaning on the shovel to catch her breath. Her nose and cheeks were bright red from the cold. The sun was already low in the sky, winter daylight fading fast. Let's keep going until dark, I suggested. See how far we get. By sunset, we'd managed only to dig down about 2 feet, 1/3 of the required depth. My hands felt raw despite wearing gloves, and my shoulders ached from the repetitive motion of breaking and lifting frozen chunks of earth. We'll continue tomorrow, I told Mom as we came inside, leaving the tools stuck in the partially excavated hole. She nodded, but the anxious look remained fixed on her face. That night, Sarah massaged my sore shoulders as I sat on the edge of the bed. Your mom seems really concerned about this one, she said quietly. I know. I've never seen her this worried about a rule before. Do you think there's something special about that corner of the yard? I considered the question. Not that I'm aware of. We've lived here my whole life, and nothing unusual has ever happened there. The next morning, we resumed our excavation project. The temperature had dropped even further overnight, refreezing the exposed soil in our hole. I had to break it up all over again before we could continue making progress. Sarah worked beside me without complaint, though I caught occasional glances that suggested she still found the entire exercise absurd. I couldn't blame her. I was questioning my own commitment with every painful strike of the digging bar. Around noon, Mom called from the back door. Daniel, there's something I want to show you. In the basement, she pointed to a small space heater. Your father used this when he needed to thaw something outside during winter, for gardening or fixing the sprinkler system. I carried the heater back to our dig site, positioned it as close as possible to the hole, and arranged a tarp over it to contain the heat. It wasn't much, but it helped soften the soil enough to make our progress slightly less grueling. As the afternoon continued, neighbors began to notice our unusual activity. Mrs. Delaney paused while walking her dog to ask what we were doing. Checking the drainage, I explained vaguely. Water's been backing up. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me but was too polite to press further. By evening, we'd reached about 4 feet deep. The hole was now large enough that one person could stand inside while the other passed the dirt up and out. We took turns in the excavation, our muscles burning from the effort. "We should stop for today," Sarah suggested as darkness descended. "Finish tomorrow." But I knew my mother wouldn't rest easy if we left the task incomplete. "Just a little deeper," I insisted. "We're close." We worked using a camping lantern I'd dug out of the garage. The light made the hole look bigger somehow, this deep pit we were digging for reasons we didn't really get. At 5 feet deep, my shovel hit something with a metallic clang that rang out in the cold night. I stopped, catching my breath, and scraped away the dirt around whatever I'd hit. "What is it?" Sarah called from above. "Something metal," I replied, continuing to clear dirt from whatever lay beneath. As more of it became visible, I could see it was a box, rectangular, about 2 feet long and a foot wide. It had once been painted black, though the color had faded and flaked in spots, revealing the metal underneath. "Hand me the lantern," I called up to Sarah. She passed it down, then carefully lowered herself into the hole beside me. Together, we cleared the remaining dirt from around the box. It wasn't locked, but years underground had caused the lid to stick. "Should we bring it up first?" Sarah asked. I nodded, and together we lifted the box out of the hole. It was surprisingly heavy. Sarah climbed out first, then helped pull me up. We set the box on the snow-covered ground as Mom came hurrying from the house, drawn by our discovery. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight with anticipation. "A metal box," I replied, kneeling beside it. It was buried exactly where the note said to dig. Using the edge of the shovel, I pried open the lid. The hinges creaked in protest, but eventually gave way. Inside, protected by a layer of plastic, lay a single VHS tape. I picked it up with unsteady hands. Written on the label in my father's distinctive handwriting were the words, "For when you find this." "Dad," I whispered, staring at the tape. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. "Eli," she said softly, using my father's nickname. "But how?" The three of us stood in stunned silence, snow beginning to collect on our shoulders as we surrounded the hole. This was no random game activity. My father had deliberately buried this message years ago, intending for us to find it someday. "I don't understand," Mom said, her voice quavering. "I never knew about this. He never told me." The genuine surprise on her face convinced me she was telling the truth. Whatever this tape contained, she had been kept in the dark just as I had. Sarah brushed snow from my shoulder. "We should go inside," she suggested gently. "Get warm. Figure out what this means." I nodded, still staring at the tape. After all these years of following rules that seemed to come out of nowhere, I finally had proof my father was mixed up in this somehow. I couldn't believe I was holding something he'd left behind. "Do we even have a VCR?" Sarah asked as we walked toward the house. "In the basement," Mom answered automatically. "We never got rid of it." I held onto the tape really tight, scared I'd drop it and lose it somehow. My dad had left this message for us buried in our backyard for years, maybe even before he died. When we got inside and kicked the snow off our boots, I felt a bunch of things at once. Happy we'd finished digging, worried about what we'd find, and kind of mad at my dad for keeping all these secrets that changed everything for us. The hole was still sitting there in the yard, just a dark spot in all that snow. I'd done exactly what the rule said, dug 6 feet down in the northwest corner of the backyard. But this rule was different from all the others I'd done. It didn't end when I finished digging. It just started something bigger, a secret that had been buried right under our house this whole time. I stared at the VHS tape in my hands, my father's handwriting on the label blurring as my eyes lost focus. The plastic case felt unnaturally cold against my fingertips, as if it had retained the chill from years buried underground. "Let me," Sarah said, gently taking the tape from me. The three of us had moved to the living room after cleaning up from our excavation. My clothes still held the earthy smell of our dig, and my muscles ached from hours of breaking through frozen soil. Mom pulled the dusty VCR from a cabinet beneath the TV stand. The device looked like an artifact from another era, boxy, with a large flip top and mechanical buttons worn smooth from years of use. Her hands trembled slightly as she blew dust from its surface. "I never thought I'd need this again," she murmured, connecting it to the television with cables she found coiled in the back of the cabinet. But I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I watched her work, struck by how quickly she recalled where everything was and how it connected. Some part of her had perhaps always known this moment might come. When the VCR was ready, we sat together on the couch, Sarah in the middle with Mom and me on either side. No one reached for the tape. "Should we?" Sarah began, then let the question hang unfinished in the air. Mom nodded. "Yes." I took the tape back from Sarah and approached the VCR. The machine accepted it with a mechanical groan, pulling it into its body with a series of clicks. I pressed play and returned to the couch, sitting so close to Sarah that our shoulders touched. The TV screen filled with static, a wall of gray and white noise that made me wonder if the tape had degraded beyond recovery. Then the picture snapped into focus. My father sat at our dining room table. The shock of seeing him after so many years made my throat tighten. He looked so young, mid-30s, with dark hair showing none of the gray that would appear at his temples later. Behind him I could see our kitchen wallpaper, a pattern Mom had replaced when I was 12, a year after his death. This wasn't just a message from my father. It was a message from the past. He cleared his throat and looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," he began, his voice steady but serious, "then you've continued the rules." Next to me, Mom made a small sound. I reached across Sarah to take her hand. "I'm recording this in January 1997, Dad continued. "Daniel is 4 years old." He paused as if gathering his thoughts. "I need to explain some things to you, things I've never fully explained before." He moved closer to the camera. The kitchen light made parts of his face dark, and you could see how serious his eyes looked. "The notes, the rules, they started in 1993, shortly after Daniel was born," he said. "Viv and I were terrified at first, finding instructions in our home written by no one we knew." He shook his head. "We consulted doctors. We thought maybe one of us was writing them without remembering. We even considered moving." My father ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen so many times it made my chest ache. "Then I started noticing patterns. When we followed the instructions, good things happened. Nothing miraculous, just strokes of luck. But when we ignored them..." He looked down at his hands. "The day I ignored the rule about taking a different route to work, your mother broke her arm." I felt Mom's hand tighten around mine. "When we followed the rule about putting pennies in the garden, we won $500 in a grocery store raffle," he continued. "The more we paid attention, the clearer the connection became." Sarah moved beside me, looking tense. I knew she was trying to come up with some science reason for what we were hearing. "I don't know where they come from," my father admitted. "I've spent years trying to figure it out. But I do believe..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I believe they're somehow connected to Daniel." The sound of my name in his voice made something catch in my throat. On screen, he looked away from the camera, glancing toward what would have been my bedroom. The first note appeared 3 weeks after we brought him home from the hospital, and they've never appeared when he's been away from the house for extended periods. "What?" I whispered. Neither Sarah nor Mom responded, both transfixed by the recording. "I'm burying this tape in the yard today," Dad continued, "along with some other documentation I've kept, patterns I've noticed, correlations between the rules and subsequent events." He held up a small notebook that wasn't visible in the box we'd found. I'm recording this because I don't know what might happen. And if something does happen to me, I need you to understand. My stomach clenched. He'd made this recording in 1997, 4 years before his accident. Yet something in his tone suggested he'd sensed his time might be limited. "The rules are real, Daniel," he said, addressing me directly now. "Not following them has consequences. I don't understand why or how, but I know it's true." His voice grew more urgent. "You need to keep playing. Keep everyone safe." The intensity in his eyes softened slightly. "Viv, if you're watching this with him, you were right all along. It was never just a game to make life interesting." He smiled sadly. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything I suspected. I didn't want to frighten you." Mom made a small, broken sound beside me. "I don't know if you'll ever find this," my father concluded. "But if you have, it means you've continued. It means you understood somehow, even without me telling you." He leaned forward, his face filling the screen. "Trust the pattern. Follow the rules. I'll keep looking for answers, and if I find anything more, I'll find a way to tell you." He reached toward the camera, and the image turned to static. None of us moved to stop the tape. We sat frozen as white noise filled the room, the harsh sound matching the static in my own head. Finally, Sarah reached forward and pressed stop. The screen went black. "He knew," Mom whispered. "All those years he knew it wasn't just a game." "Did you?" I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. She shook her head slowly. "I suspected something. Especially after he..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "But he never told me outright. He always made it seem like fun, something to make our lives more interesting despite not having much money." Sarah stood up and paced to the window, her back to us. "This can't be real," she said quietly. "There has to be a rational explanation." "Like what?" I asked. "I don't know." She turned back to face us. "Maybe your father was experiencing delusions. Maybe he wrote the notes himself without realizing it. For years, without either of us noticing." Mom's voice had an edge to it now. "And then they continued after he died. Who was writing them then?" "I don't know," Sarah repeated more forcefully this time. "But invisible forces leaving notes around your house isn't exactly the most logical conclusion." I remained silent, trying to process what I'd just seen. The man on the tape wasn't the fun dad I remembered who always made the best of our tight budget. He was someone more complicated, scared, protective, and convinced of something impossible. "He said the notes are connected to me," I finally said. Mom nodded. "They started after you were born. But why? What am I supposed to do with them?" I gestured toward the TV, still blank and silent. "What does he expect me to do with this information?" No one had an answer. Outside, the hole we'd dug in the yard remained open, 6 feet deep, just as the rule had instructed. A perfect depth to bury secrets. "He mentioned documentation," Sarah said. "A notebook. Was there anything else in the box?" I reached for the metal container we'd brought inside. The tape had been sealed in plastic, but beneath where it had sat was a layer of paper. Most had deteriorated from moisture that had seeped in over the years, leaving only fragments of what appeared to be a journal. I carefully lifted out the largest remaining piece. Though water damaged, I could make out part of a list in my father's handwriting. June 3rd, 1993. Rule: place water in blue cup on kitchen table. June 4th. Car accident on our street. Water in cup rose 1-2 inch overnight. June 10th, 1993. Rule: everyone wear red. June 11th. Power outage in neighborhood except our house. "He was tracking them," I said, showing Mom the paper, noting what happened after we followed each rule. "Your father was very thorough," she said softly. "He liked to find patterns in things." Sarah took the fragment from me, examining it with a scientist's scrutiny. "Correlation doesn't equal causation," she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. I leaned back against the couch, suddenly exhausted. Everything I thought I knew about my childhood had been rewritten in 30 minutes. The silly family game that had defined so much of my life had never been a game at all. My father had been genuinely convinced that following these rules protected us from harm, and then he had died following one of them. I felt the bitter irony of it all. The rule that had sent him to Denver to buy a specific model airplane had led directly to his death on the highway. If he'd truly believed the rules were protective, how must he have felt in those final moments, trapped in his crumpled car? Had he wondered why the rule had failed him? "What do we do now?" Mom asked, her voice small. I had no answer. A lifetime of following arbitrary instructions stretched behind me, and suddenly all of it felt significant in ways I'd never considered. The rules had shaped our family's entire existence, our routines, our relationships, our sense of security. "We need time to process this," Sarah said, practical as always. She set the fragment of paper carefully back in the box. "It's been a long day. Let's get some rest and talk more tomorrow." Mom nodded absently, her eyes still fixed on the black TV screen as if she might glimpse my father again if she looked hard enough. As we prepared for bed, I found myself checking corners, looking behind picture frames, examining the backs of cabinet doors. All the places rules had appeared throughout my life. Was I looking for new instructions, or trying to catch a glimpse of whatever force my father believed was watching us? Sarah noticed my behavior but said nothing, her face a careful mask of neutrality. I knew she was trying to be supportive despite her skepticism. The scientific mind I'd always admired in her was now struggling with something that defied rational explanation. In bed that night, I lay awake long after Sarah's breathing had deepened into sleep. The tape kept replaying in my mind. My father's earnest face, his absolute conviction, his fear. Trust the pattern. Follow the rules. Keep everyone safe. I turned his words over in my head, examining them from every angle. Had he been right? Were the rules actually protecting us? Or had his fear created meaning from random coincidence? Outside, snow began to fall, covering the open hole in the yard with a fresh blanket of white. I wondered what else might be buried beneath the surface of our lives, waiting to be uncovered by the right instruction at the right time. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear. The rules had never been a simple game, and ignoring them now felt more dangerous than ever. The kitchen felt smaller in the morning light. I sat at the table, staring at the worn surface where generations of breakfast plates had left their circular ghosts. My mind kept replaying fragments of my father's message, his earnest eyes, the certainty in his voice, the casual mention that I was somehow connected to something inexplicable. Sarah slid into the chair beside me, her hair still damp from the shower. She placed her hand over mine, her skin warm against my cold fingers. "You don't actually believe this, right?" she asked gently, her voice pitched low enough that it wouldn't carry beyond our small bubble of space. I didn't answer immediately. What did I believe? That invisible forces left instructional notes around our house? That following random commands somehow protected us from harm? It sounded absurd when framed that way, yet the alternative, that my father had suffered from delusions that my mother and I had blindly adopted, felt equally impossible to accept. "I don't know what to believe," I finally admitted. The floorboards creaked as Mom entered the kitchen, carrying 3 coffee cups positioned carefully between her hands. She set them down without meeting our eyes, then turned to retrieve the coffee pot from the counter. "Did you know?" I asked as she poured the steaming liquid into each cup. Her pouring hand paused momentarily before continuing. "Did I know what exactly?" "That the rules weren't just a game. That Dad thought they were I trailed off, unable to find the right words to describe what my father had believed. Mom set the pot down and took the seat across from us. Her face looked drawn, with faint purple shadows beneath her eyes, suggesting she'd slept as poorly as I had. "I suspected," she said quietly. "There were moments when your father's insistence seemed too urgent for a simple family tradition. When we missed following a rule once, and he drove all the way back from work at lunch to complete it." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "But he always downplayed it when I asked directly, said it was just to make life more interesting." "But you believed him?" "I trusted him," she corrected. "There's a difference. And things did seem to go wrong when we didn't follow the rules exactly. Small things usually, but too consistent to ignore entirely." Sarah moved beside me. I could tell her brain was trying to come up with normal explanations for the patterns my parents had noticed. "Like what kind of things?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. Mom took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "The basement flooded the day after we ignored a rule about placing cups of water in specific spots. Danny broke his arm at soccer practice when we failed to wear the colors specified in a note. The neighbor's tree fell on our car when we didn't count backward from 100 as instructed." She shrugged slightly. "Coincidences, maybe. But they added up." My thoughts drifted to my father's final day. His drive to Denver to buy that specific model airplane, the jackknifed semi-truck on I-70, the crash that had left Mom a widow and me fatherless. He'd been following a rule when he died. The bitter irony settled in my stomach like a stone. "The rule killed him," I said, the words emerging before I could temper them. Mom flinched visibly. "I've thought about that every day since the accident," she admitted. "If I'd asked him not to go that day, if we'd just ignored that one instruction." "Why didn't we?" I asked. "After that, why did we keep following them?" "Because I was terrified," she said simply. "If the rules really were protecting us, then ignoring them might mean losing you too. I couldn't risk it." We sat in silence, all lost in our own thoughts. Outside, the morning sun bounced off the snowy yard, making the hole we dug look like just a dark spot on the white ground. Sarah reached for the sugar bowl, pulling it toward her coffee cup. As she took off the lid, a folded piece of paper fell out and landed next to her spoon. I felt a jolt of excitement. I knew that fold, that type of paper. Sarah opened it quietly, read the short message, then passed it to me. "All three must visit the lake before sundown." Mom leaned forward, reading it upside down from across the table. Her eyes got a bit wider. I looked at the note. The block letters matched hundreds of similar notes I'd seen throughout my life. The paper was the same plain white kind, folded the same way as every other rule we'd gotten. Could I really believe what my father had suggested? That some hidden power demanded we do these things? That we'd be in danger if we didn't follow these random instructions? "The nearest lake is Sloan's Lake," Mom said, her voice unnaturally even. "About 20 minutes away." "We don't have to do this," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I felt a familiar anxiety rising. Sarah took the note from me, studying it with the careful attention she normally reserved for her research materials. I expected her to deliver a rational assessment, to remind us that paper notes didn't appear spontaneously, that coincidence wasn't causation. Instead, she surprised me. "I think," she said carefully, "we should go to the lake." I stared at her. "Yesterday you were convinced this was all delusional thinking. I still think there's a rational explanation," she clarified. "But until we find it, I don't see the harm in following the instruction. It's not asking us to do anything dangerous. Just in case," Mom added softly. I looked at my mom and Sarah sitting at the table. Mom had stuck to these rules her whole life, while Sarah was all about science, but still open to believing this stuff, at least for now. I kept thinking about what Dad always told me. Trust the pattern, follow the rules, keep everyone safe. I wondered if I was supposed to protect them now, Maybe I always was. I nodded and grabbed my coat from the back of my chair. Okay, we'll go to the lake. I didn't want to find out what would happen if we broke the rules. Not when it might put Mom and Sarah in danger. Before we left, I checked around the house for more notes or instructions. Nothing. The house was quiet, except for the paper telling us to go to the lake. I had no idea what we'd find there. Would anything even happen? Or would we just stand by the frozen lake until dark, doing another pointless ritual like all the others I'd done my whole life? I didn't know. But as we walked out into the cold, I realized I was scared to find out, but also really needed answers about the weird stuff happening in my normal-looking life.